We like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Supernatural Hour. I'm Tim.
I'm Raven.
Chad.
The Annabelle doll.
You know what? And this story to me is just fascinating. Is this kind of thing that got me interested in the paranormal, just because it's kind of spooky. So if you're unfamiliar with the actual story, if you've seen the movie obviously is Hollywoodized. It's not a creepy looking doll. Annabelle, if you don't know, is actually just a Raggedy Ann doll, just a floppy 1970s red yarn, cutesy little dress, smiley Raggedy Ann doll.
About 2.5 to 3 feet tall, standing up.
Yep.
It's the bigger one. It's not the little ones.
Right. It's the bigger one. And
it's about 4 pounds, I believe they said, or something like
that.
Right.
And probably 80% of girls that grew up in the 1970s probably had one of these. I did not.
You know what I found interesting?
I wasn't cool enough to have a Raggedy Ann doll.
We had a Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy under our staircase at my home for years.
I see.
There used to be a cartoon, I believe, on Raggedy Ann, and I used to watch that. I remember, like, in the 80s. It was not something I remember too much of, other than there was a cartoon I used to watch.
Yeah, I remember the cartoon. I don't know that I watched it. We were more Scooby-Doo people.
You know what I found interesting, though?
Those dark kids?
I think we're still kind of Scooby-Doo people.
Yeah, I agree.
Would have got away with it if it weren't for them darn kids.
Those darn kids. Pull the mask off.
I know. There's a lot of old people with money wearing masks running around in the Scooby-Doo universe, apparently.
Yes, there are. So anyway, it was a nurse, and she received a Raggedy Ann doll from her mother for Christmas.
Didn't they say she was about 20?
So here's where I find a bunch of inconsistencies with the story.
Okay.
First off, from what I've read, it was for her birthday. She was 25, or she was 28. It was 1968, 1970.
And see, for me, you get a couple years wrong, I mean, that's been a long time ago. And if you ask me when I got certain birthday presents, certain present, is it for my birthday? Is it for Christmas? I mean, if it's long enough ago. I don't think the time frame or the age and all that is
material
too important to the story.
Right.
What I did find interesting, what I really thought was confused me, the names were different on one documentary I watched and in the Demonologist itself, as opposed to all the websites I was looking at.
And I never looked at the name. I was just more concerned about facts. So yeah. I don't even know what her name is.
So on everything online, it was Donna was the main girl, the girl that received the doll. In the Demonologist, which is a biography written on Ed and Lorraine Warren and some of their cases, her name was Deidre.
Now, and here's my question is, did they change the name to protect the innocent? Did they just make up a name? That could be a factor. But I look at it as, okay, it was a woman in her 20s who received a doll from her mother as a gift in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yep. So
there we go.
Her name was, according to the Demonologist, her name was Deidre Bernard. Her roommate was Laura Clifton, and her fiance, Laura's fiance, was Cal Randall. And everything else I've read, the roommate was Angie, and the fiance was Lou. Again, I'm going to go with, I don't think the names are actually important.
Right.
Because the things that remain consistent throughout all the research is that they were nurses and the guy was the fiance.
Right.
Some stories say he lived there with them. Some say he lived at home, but he was there quite a bit.
Right. So the consistency that I see is there was, a woman, her roommate, they were both nurses, and one of them had a fiance.
Yep. So again, I don't think the specifics are that important, but I'm just mentioning them to draw out the show.
Right now, I'm gonna apologize because I took like 6 or 7 pages of notes. I'm teaching myself with the help of some friends Arabic, and to make the little dots in the Arabic language, ballpoint pens and I don't work, so I have to use a different kind of a pen, and I can't read my own notes. So, just forgive me now when I stammer and stutter a little bit because this looks like chicken scratch.
But your notes were from an interview that was Ed and Lorraine actually talking.
We watched just like a documentary, and it was actually Ed and Lorraine speaking from their actual experiences. So this is straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. It's not someone said that Ed said or someone said that Lorraine said. It was actually them talking to an interviewer. So that's where I'm getting my information from.
Okay, well, let's go from there.
So the main lady, whose name I don't even know,
Donna or
Deidre. She received this doll as a gift from her mother, and she loved it. She's moved out. She's a nurse. She's moved into an apartment. She's in her 20s, but she sleeps with this doll. And being a girl, sometimes you just need something to cuddle with. So she would take this doll to bed with her, and she's kind of having fun with it. I'm going to take the doll to breakfast, and so they would take the doll down to breakfast, and then the doll would sit there, and kind of as a joke. And didn't really think anything of it. They would talk to the doll like it was a child. Well, one day they're sitting there at the table, and they've brought the doll down several times for breakfast. Well, this one day, the doll's arms move, and the doll puts her arms on the table. And needless to say, it kind of freaked everybody out just a little bit. But they weren't too scared. At first it was like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. There's that underlying doll shouldn't do that, but it was kind of like, doll shouldn't do that. That's kind of cool. And so they kind of figured it had a spirit in there, and they decided to bring in a medium and do a seance.
Well, it was doing a lot more than that before the medium was brought in. Within the first month of having the doll, it did levitate its arms. They would find it. She would leave it on her bed when she'd go to work. She'd come home. She'd purposely position the doll in certain ways, and she'd come home and it would be, the arms would be crossed, or the legs would be crossed, or it would be sitting upright in bed instead of laying down where she put it. And it even started moving rooms.
Right.
So it started going, she'd leave it in her room, it would end up in the living room, or it would end up in her roommate's room, or just random places in the house where she didn't have it.
Right.
So,
and one day they came home and it was standing up. And if you know the kind of doll we're talking about, it can't just randomly be standing. It physically cannot just stand there.
yeah, it was standing up. There was another time where they came home and they found it kneeling on the couch like it was praying. And they tried to recreate it and they couldn't, because, like you said, it's a Raggedy Ann doll.
They're fluffy.
It's fluff. There's no way for it to physically stand up on its own. Something has to be holding it up.
If you tried to stand it up on its own, it's going to fall over. The best it's going to do is maybe end up in a V, on its head if you prop it up, with its legs and its head on the ground, making kind of a teepee sort of a thing.
So all this going on, it kind of piqued their curiosity. So they started doing things around the house, like they apparently put like Scotch tape on the doors to see if the tape was broken. They started putting things in certain positions, like the rugs in certain positions, to see if someone had like a key or someone was coming in and moving the doll. And the thing was none of that stuff ever changed. The doll would move rooms or move positions, but everything would stay exactly how they left them.
Yeah, none of their little traps, booby traps would be trapped.
So after all this, that piqued their curiosity, and they contacted the medium.
So the medium came, and they did a seance, and the medium said, you know what, there is a spirit in this doll, and it's the spirit of this 6-year-old little girl who was killed just outside your house. And they did some research, and there was a little girl that was killed outside their house, and the little girl's name was Annabelle, which is why, to my understanding, the doll was named Annabelle.
Annabelle Higgins.
And but what Ed said was, and this is his belief, and it's my belief too, that a little child is not going to be in this doll,
infesting a doll.
And he was very adamant that it was a demon posing as a child, and the reason it poses as a child is to get sympathy. And we'll talk in a minute about the 4 stages of possession, which this one didn't get to that 4th stage, but it falls right in line with that whole system.
I think it was in the 1st or 2nd phase.
Yeah, I don't think it got past that 2nd phase.
But what we've learned through our experiences, and just through even Ed and Lorraine Warren studies and whatnot, human spirits cannot possess anything at all. Like, it's not possible for a human spirit to possess a person, place, object, anything.
Nope.
They can haunt them, but they can't physically possess something. It's just not possible.
No, they can't. So just the fact that they took this doll for rides, they bought it things, they talked to it.
They treated it like a child.
They treated it like a child, and they gave it a lot of attention.
Which gives it power.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, it's understandable when you have someone that you think is respectable and is telling you accurate information that it's a little girl. They're nurses. They help people. That's what they do. They even mentioned that in their interview with Ed and Lorraine. They help people. And so they thought this little girl was inhabiting this doll, so that's why they treated it like a little girl. They didn't think anything of it.
It's kind of like their pet in a way. They're going to give this little girl attention. So they started getting, knocking sounds, unexplained lights, because, once a demonic spirit, gets to that, gets your attention, then it starts getting a little ugly. And so, their bed would shake, they'd have cold spots, they'd hear whispering. Anyway, things started ramping up, and these nurses went from, having this fun little, pet, as it were, or, their own little child, their little plaything. They started to get scared. And so what they did was, they would kind of work different shifts, but they got scared, and they geared their work shifts so that they would work the same shift, because no one wanted to be alone with this doll, and they wanted to be able to come home together and be together. And so this is when they actually came home, and the doll started, instead of being in different poses, this is when they came in and the doll would be standing, and the doll would be, doing unnatural things, and their fear started to ramp up a little bit. They went from, oh, this is a cute, fun little thing, to, oh, crap, what's happening?
Well, and they also found notes.
Yep.
Written in pencil and parchment, which neither one of those things were in the house. They tore the house apart trying to find out where it came from.
Who writes on parchment anymore?
Right, and especially then, like in the 70s, I don't know that it was readily available.
There's the one or two people that still
I don't think
do,
it's available now, to be honest with you. Sure, if you wanted to find it, you could because of the internet, but that wasn't around back then.
Yeah, people don't just randomly write on parchment anymore.
But it would be notes like "help us" or "help Cal/Lou," because I don't know what his name really was, but they were just confused because nothing was wrong with him at the time.
Right. So the fiance, that's a good segue into this next little part. So the fiance of the one girl, started recognizing it for what it was. And he said, you got to burn it. That's evil. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. But one night, he fell asleep, and the doll, was pretty close by. Well, he had woken up from a dream, a bad dream that he had about Annabelle. And the bad dream that he had was that Annabelle was choking him, and he woke up with marks on his neck.
The way it was described in The Demonologist, he actually witnessed it slowly climbing up his body until it got up to his neck, and it put one hand on each side of his neck, and it felt like an electric charge shooting through his neck like it was choking him, and he couldn't breathe. He said he tried to fight it off. He tried to throw it off of him across the room, and he couldn't. He couldn't get it off of him.
Now, is this in the dream, or did this actually happen?
Well, he is convinced it actually happened.
Okay.
He doesn't believe that was an actual dream. And depending on where you're reading it, it either happened at his house or when he was over there. I don't know. But to him, it did happen. And like you said, there was the marks on his neck.
Right. So at some point, he was able to get some control, and he was able to get the doll, and he threw it. And, he's scared. That would be terrifying. Whether it's a dream or whether it really happened, it would be scary. But there were actually marks on his neck. I have no doubt in my mind that it actually happened. Based on all, a bunch of different, not only this, but just different people with different experiences. I have no doubt that it tried to strangle him. So, but at one point he was able to overpower it. He threw it, and he said, "You are just a rag doll. You can't hurt anyone." And just moments after he said that, 7 slashes appeared on him to come from nowhere, and blood came through his shirt from these slashes, and the nurses witnessed this. This wasn't just him saying this is what happened. So he was at their apartment when this happened. But the nurses saw the blood, and the blood soaked through his shirt. It wasn't just scratches. I've been scratched before. Everyone on our team has been scratched at one point or another, but these were slashes that actually bled through.
Yeah, so another version of that, him and his fiance, so Angie, we'll just do Angie and Lou because that's what every website says. They were home by themselves. Donna was out working, and they heard a knocking noise coming from, I believe, Angie's room. So he went in to check it out, and Annabelle was sitting in the corner. And he instantly felt a dark presence standing behind him. So he turned around and no one was there. And then that's when he got the slashes. So it was 7 slashes. I believe it was 3 vertical and 4 horizontal across his chest. And they say that they healed up pretty quick. Within 2 days, they were gone.
So as I'm looking at my...
They look like animal claws, like an animal had clawed him across the chest.
Yeah, no doubt. So I'm looking at my notes, and about this time, and I don't know if it was necessarily this very same day, but just in the chain of events, it goes from cute little things happening, little notes, and, arms raising. The
only thing I think we forgot to mention, at one point, before all of the crazy stuff started happening, with the slashes and all that, they did find the Annabelle doll with 3 drops of blood on her chest, and then some blood on the hand.
That would not be something to find. But as I'm looking at my notes, it says huge something rolled across the room. I have no idea what it is, but something that was big rolled across the room. Pictures started smashing off the walls for no reason. They started getting banging sounds, which is kind of classic demonic infestation stuff. And at this point, everyone was terrified. You get to the point where it's like, okay, wow, scary crap is happening. And that's when they finally made the phone call. They called clergy. The clergy actually called the Warrens. And
I think it went higher up first. They called their priest. He called someone higher up. They called the Warrens, and they're like, all right.
Right, because they actually performed an exorcism, and you can't perform an exorcism unless you have permission from the Catholic Church. You can't just go in and say, we're going to perform an exorcism and do it. You have to have permission. And Ed Warren is I think he's the only Catholic person.
I don't even think he's Catholic.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He's the only non-Catholic person
that the church recognizes,
authorized by the Catholic Church to perform exorcisms.
Yeah, they're the only. At the time, I believe he was the only one. Like you said, they even recognized him as a demonologist. He was the only one that they did that with.
Right. So yeah. So I mean, you don't just call up the exorcism store and say, "Hey, can you come over?" I mean, you got to go through a whole process. So I mean, we're making this sound like it was just the next day, but it's quite the process to get that to happen. So, in order for the Catholic Church to say, yeah, go ahead and perform an exorcism, you've got to have some pretty solid proof, some pretty solid evidence. I guess that's kind of the same thing. But you can't just say, I think I need an exorcism, and the Catholic Church is going to say, yeah, all right, we'll send someone over. I mean, you got to have some legit crap going on.
Well, and see, when the Warrens were very active, it was something that happened a lot in their cases. They'd be called in to check it out and give their honest opinion and report back to the church what they thought, before the church would look into the matters even further and make that decision. So it's not something that they do on a whim.
Right. And I've heard of cases where, I'm looking at it thinking, yeah, you need an exorcism. And they've really had to hard press the Catholic Church to get it done. And it's taken a long time, for that to follow through.
But they were able to, after the exorcism, they were able to determine that the entity was no longer oppressing the nurses and the fiance, which is, I believe, the second stage of infestation or possession.
And we'll talk about that in just a second.
But they determined that they were free from the negative entity and that it wasn't with them or in the home anymore. They had actually told the Warrens that they planned on moving, and that's when Ed's like, I got to break it down to you. Like, this is an inhuman spirit. It's not a little girl. Never was. Mm-hmm. It's moving's not going to help. It's just going to follow you. Right.
But it didn't get rid of the spirit out of the doll. The spirit is still in the doll. The point of the exorcism, if I'm understanding this correctly, is to get the entity unlatched to these 3 people.
Yes, and that's exactly what they did.
Home. And the home.
And they were able to do that. And the girl no longer wanted the doll, wanted nothing to do it, and Lorraine as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that.
I don't know why.
Let's just keep it in the corner just in case.
But as a safety precaution, the Warrens took it home. And the funny thing is on the way home, they actually started feeling that negative, foreboding feeling, and the car kept stalling out on them. And it got to the point where Ed actually had to stop the car. They considered throwing it out into the woods and just leaving it, but then they kind of were like, well, we don't know if it's going to make its way back to their house or who's going to find it.
Or whose house is it going to make it back
to?
They
ended up using holy water, signing it with the cross, and the activity stopped, and they were able to make it home safely. But there was a lot of activity that happened at their house that I actually think that led them to putting it in the glass case that it's in now.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is, and I kind of skipped over this, but, Ed said that he had actual film of events happening. He had videos, which, again, is kind of the same thing.
Well, they had photographs, too.
He's got recordings, credible eyewitness testimony. I mean, But the interesting thing is, after he took this doll to his museum, other things happened. There was a priest, because the Warrens, deal with a lot of priests.
Did you hear about the black cat?
No.
So before all of that happened, well, the black cat happened before the priest. The priest thing happened before they put it in the case. But there would be a black cat that would just appear out of nowhere right next to the doll in his office and walk around.
I think I did hear about that, actually.
It would walk around the room like it was checking out the books and just kind of studying his room. And then it would walk back over to the doll and just disappear.
Yeah, that would be creepy. Yeah, so this priest... the Warrens have been dealing with him, and he got a new car. And he's like, hey, I've got this new car. I'm so proud of it. Come on a drive with me. I mean, it was not even anything paranormal. They're friends, they're buddies, they hang out. And it was a brand new car. And so they went for a ride. And everything was great. They had hey, your car's awesome. Thanks for taking the ride. Well, he brings them back to the house, and he says, hey, I hear you've got this doll, and I've heard all the stories, and can I see it? And they're like, yeah, sure. So they go down, and the doll's in a chair, and he walks over to it. He picks it up, he throws it across the room, and he said, God's more powerful than a devil. And, he's trying to be all that. And less than an hour later...
Well, on the way home, before he left, Lorraine actually said, be careful driving home.
Okay. And so, less than an hour later, his car goes out of control, just like the Warrens did, earlier, and just like the Warrens did when they were investigating Amityville. They had car troubles then.
I believe his brakes went out on him.
Yeah, and it says half the car was sheared off. And I can't remember if they even said
what it was.
Hit a truck. I can't remember if it was a truck or a tree. And he should have died. But what Ed said was, God will only let... Oops, my notes are kind of weird. The devil go so far sometimes. So... he actually survived, but he says the last thing he remembers seeing was an image of the doll before he crashed.
Yeah, right in the rear view mirror, he saw it sitting in the back seat. Mm-hmm. There was also a friend of theirs that was a police officer, I believe, that came over to the house once.
Detective. Actually.
Yeah, detective. Didn't really believe in the paranormal.
See, I wrote policeman, and then I scratched it out and put detective.
Sweet. From what I understand, he didn't really believe in the paranormal.
No, they were working on a murder of a little child, and they worked with Lorraine a lot because she's
clairvoyant.
Clairvoyant. And so, anyway, go ahead.
So, yeah, I guess while he was over there working on the case with them, I think he went upstairs, or he went into the office where the doll was. And
he has to look around the museum. And it's like, yeah, just don't touch anything. And he had to go to the bathroom or answer the phone or something.
Phone call, I think he had.
I think when the detective came back, Ed said that the detective was... He didn't really talk. He just kept saying, he's like, the doll, it's real, or something like that.
Yeah, and Ed said he was visibly shaken and pale, and he was only in there for 10 minutes. And
it kind of made him more of a believer in the paranormal after that.
Well, Ed thought that he'd had a heart attack or something.
Oh, really?
Because he was just pale and shaking, and Ed's thinking, oh, are you having a medical episode? Do I need to help you? And the detective says...
They were thinking about calling an ambulance.
Yeah, and Ed was like, or the detective was like, no, I don't want to talk about it. And so, after they got it taken care of, or, they got everything settled, Ed and Lorraine went into the museum, and everything was actually knocked over, and the detective actually resigned. He was like, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, and he resigned his post. So, then there was one more. There was a college student that said it was crap, and he went over and knocked it, because at some point Ed put the doll in a case. He's like, we can't have people touching this or picking it up, we gotta knock that off. And if you've seen it, there's a sign on it that says, do not open this case for any reason whatsoever. And I'm paraphrasing. But this college student went over and knocked on the case, and he says, you can't do anything. And he dared it to put slashes in him. And when Ed heard this, Ed kicked him out. He's like, you can't mess with this. You got to leave.
Yeah, don't challenge That's one of our rules, huh?
Yep, don't challenge.
Yep.
That's our first rule, number 1.
Yeah, do not challenge. And 3 hours later, this boy was dead. And his girlfriend said they were on a motorcycle. And the girlfriend was with him, and she said that he was laughing about the doll, making fun of it, and they smashed into a tree. And the girlfriend actually ended up being in the hospital for over a year with, residual issues from this. So yeah, please don't challenge stuff.
So another thing that happened, they were actually having a party, and I guess they had like a 24-inch long like boar's tooth necklace in Ed's office, and it just exploded. So there was a father there, a priest there at the time, that went in to inspect it to see what was going on. And I believe he picked up the Annabelle. He saw the doll move, and he picked it up, and everyone snapped photos of the priest. And when they developed the film, there was 2 bright beacons of light above Annabelle pointing at the priest.
Oh, wow. So, ultimately, Annabelle, it happened 50 years ago, give or take. And, in 50 years, certain details can get a little skewed and, blah, blah, blah. But I have no doubt in my mind that these things actually happened. I have no doubt in my mind that it was, that the doll was possessed by a demonic entity. And this kind of segues, that's the word of the day, segues. I think we've used it about 4 or 5 times.
It's a thing you ride around the mall.
But I kind of want to talk about the 4 steps of possession, because this was, I think if they'd let this go, I think it would have followed all the way through, and the nurse that owned the doll would have been possessed.
Well, and the demonologists, they straight up say, like, had it went another week or 2, it probably would have killed them all.
Yeah. So the first step is infestation. And infestation is just your typical haunted house type of stuff. Objects moving, footsteps, odors with no source that you can tell. Infestations don't affect people directly. It's going to affect property, objects, sometimes animals, but it's pretty benign. At first, it's just going to kind of lure you in. It's just kind of, poking the bear and, hey, look at me, just kind of trying to get your attention. The next step is oppression, and this is where your activity steps up. This is where the demonic entity, the inhumane entity, says, okay, I've got their attention, now let's kind of move in for the kill.
So these are the progression of a demonic possession.
Yes.
Okay, because that first step, oftentimes human spirits might try to get your attention.
Right. And if it's a human spirit trying to get your attention, you're going to get that same, that first step, the infestation. You're going to get the footsteps. You're going to get objects moving. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a demon trying to possess you. So I don't want an uptick in phone calls. Listen to the rest of this. If we start moving on to number 3, maybe give us a call. So oppression, this is where the activity steps up. You're going to start getting physical attacks. You're going to start getting, scratches or the slashes like in the Annabelle doll. Sleep disturbances, including nightmares, anxiety, depression. Now, you're going to be listening to this going, oh my gosh, we've got number 2. Now, a lot of this just happens in life. In life, we have bad dreams. In life, we get anxiety, we get depression. If you watch the news, your anxiety and depression are probably through the roof. I had a moment a couple days ago where I just couldn't handle life. But if you get one after the other just in a really quick succession, that's when you maybe have to say to yourself, maybe there's a problem. So step 3 is obsession. Now, this is when the afflicted person has a hard time functioning. You're constantly preoccupied with thoughts of demonic activity, and demonic activity commandeering your life. You have frequent thoughts of, frequent thoughts of suicide. Sleep is nearly impossible at this point. And after the obsession point, this is where the possession actually comes in. Now, contrary to popular belief, possession is not demons entering someone's body and taking over your soul and everything. Your free will is never removed. Your free will is there, but it's severely compromised if you're possessed. People that are possessed, you're so broken down from the first 3 steps that you have, the demonic entities and human entities are just really able to take over your actions. They really can't take over your thoughts. Your thoughts are still there, and that's why exorcism works. But you really have to fight through it. You have to fight because you've been so broken down that you just want to give up. So some of the signs, if you're actually possessed, some signs are superhuman strength. You can suddenly speak foreign languages that you don't know. You have knowledge that you shouldn't have. Severe aversion to holy objects. And even changes in your facial features. One of the things, as I was just doing some research to make sure I had this all straight, is it said that 360-degree head spins are not included in possessions. That can't actually happen.
No, that would break your neck and kill you.
Yeah, so if that's happening, you got something else
pea soup
on.
thrown out of your mouth. I have talked to a lot of people over the years that have told me experiences that they've had, mainly Mormon missionaries.
Oh, I've heard some crazy experiences.
Talking about how they've, it's mainly in other countries too. It hasn't been here in the U.S., but missionaries that have been on their mission in other states or countries have dealt with something similar. Like they've had like a daughter that was upstairs in the bedroom, and they're in the Philippines or whatever, and the kid starts speaking perfect English to these American Mormon missionaries.
Right.
The kid had no experience with English, like hasn't learned it, hadn't been taught it. I've heard tons of stories. Like I had one guy that used to tell me all the stories of when he was on his mission on a Native American reservation. I've been hearing stuff from, and then I think it's fascinating. It's always Mormon missionaries that seem to have the best stories when it comes to dealing with that part of possession.
Right. Well, I think, Castle and I, earlier on, and in a couple episodes, we've mentioned kind of the experience that he and I had back in the 1990s. But the man that we were dealing with, I do believe that he was possessed, and he actually started speaking in a language that we didn't recognize, and that was super creepy. So, yeah, I don't like that. Anyway, so that is Annabelle. Yeah.
Not scary to look at. Scary to be around. Oh, so one other thing I do want to mention. I spoke to Peaches on the way down to record. And in her opinion, the doll is no longer possessed, or it doesn't have that attachment with the spirit anymore. She doesn't believe that the spirit is actually with the doll. It could be somewhere, we don't know. However, this spirit was able to put enough of its residual negative energy into the doll that it's there to this day. The doll still does remain dangerous. And, we can't say for sure whether or not the spirit is left, because we've only seen pictures and videos. We haven't actually physically been around the doll.
Right, so
there is still a lot of negative energy on that doll. It is not something to be messed with. Don't go to the museum. Don't start taunting it. Because this entity did put that intention in there to mess with people that kind of try to provoke it. So its energy is still with that doll to this day.
Right. So the next thing I'm going to say is completely my opinion. So take it or leave it, with whatever. But in my opinion, these kind of entities were denied a body, and that's what they want, and they will do whatever they need to get one. And they don't know how to work one when they get one. And so I could see the entity, sitting inside this doll in a museum going, well, I can't get anybody here. And so I think it moved on to try to, find someone. But I do think it left a little marker there. And I think if someone were to get it, it would go, oh, hey, so, hey, there's somebody.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, I mean, it's like us. And I think we unknowingly leave our energy wherever we go. And it's something that entities, some gifted people can actually pick up on. They can and trace your energy, and
yep.
With it leaving its own energy purposely on this doll, I think your reason or your theory there is absolutely true. If someone's around it, it can be like, oh hey,
yeah, hey, look, someone's paying attention to me. Let's go back to the doll. Right now, I'm in a book in a library, but no one's paying attention to me here. We'll go back to the doll. Yeah.
So I don't think it wanders around that museum only. I think it's out there somewhere.
Yep. No, it's
our
somewhere.
Personal opinion. We don't have a way to prove it, so don't go around and be like, oh, they said.
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of did, but we didn't. And it could be there, it could not be there.
I also don't like avocado, so hey, there you go.
Yeah. I don't think it's just chilling in the museum. I think it's out there somewhere.
It's looking for
my
somewhere.
Personal opinion. Sweet. We also have merchandise on our website, advancedparanormal.com. Go to the merchandise tab and you can buy a lot of our cool swag. Show some love and support.
I need some swag.
So we'll call it an episode. I'm stealing Dawn's line this week.
It's an episode.
We'll call it an episode.
Peace out, butterflies.
See you next week.
See ya.
Next time.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin Network, found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright 2021 by Advanced Paranormal Services.